Now let's summarize what we've learned for a moment. Up to this point, we've looked at provider, change and notify provider, multi-provider, feature provider, and stream provider, and we've looked at various ways to access type T object in widgets through providers. Items colored here will be frequently used in the future. The official document defines consumer as follows: obtains provider T from its ancestor and passes a value to builder. This means that developers do not need to explicitly obtain a type T object through the provider.ov. The consumer widget doesn't do any fancy work. It just calls provider.ov in a new widget and delegates its build implementation to builder. This means you don't need to call provider.ov directly from within consumer widget. Please note that builder, which we will see often in the future, is being used. The builder is closely related to build context. A builder must not be null and may be called multiple times, such as when the provided value changes. This means that, obviously, the builder should not be null and the builder should be called whenever the value changes. Then, the question here is whether everything that does not need to be rebuilt will be rebuilt if consumer is used. For that, builder has a nullable type child argument. Let's look at the details through an example. Now then, we will create an app to apply consumer. In this example, we will test consumer by modifying the provider overview 05 app. Let's start after creating the provider overview 08 app and copying everything from provider overview 05. Here, we will wrap the center widget with a consumer widget. Briefly cut the center widget and designate the provider type in consumer and create a builder function. The builder function here will have 3 arguments. The first is build context, the second is provided object, and the third is child, which I'll explain later. That is an optional argument used when optimizing the build. If build context is not used in the builder function, you can mark it with an underscore. If both build context and child are not used, child can be marked with a double underscore. The context what is no longer needed because the dog object is given, and you can modify it with the dog.name instead. Next is the breed and age widget. We'll cut the column widget and change it so consumer is returned. Since we are not going to use the build context argument and the nullable type child argument, we'll mark each one with an underscore and one with a double underscore. And since we receive the dog object as an argument, we'll modify context.select to dog.breed. We will go to age widget and cut the column and change it so consumer is returned. And since we are not going to use the build context argument and the nullable type child argument here as well, we'll mark each, one with the underscore and one with a double underscore. And since we'll receive the dog object as an argument, we'll modify it to dog.age and modify onPressed context.read to dog.grow. Let's do a hard restart and test it. It works properly. However, since consumer is used several times here, it seems to be less convenient than when we use the extension method. In our current example, using consumer doesn't seem very desirable. In this case, it seems more preferable to wrap the consumer widget once at the beginning and send dog down as a property to the widgets below. But let's say that there is a widget that is not related to the provided object in the column. However, since the column is in the consumer, even if a specific widget is not related to the provider object, it will be rebuilt. If the app is large, this would be undesirable, right? For that, we'll create a text widget that doesn't need to be rebuilt on top of the text widget that displays the dog's name. I made a text widget that is not related to the dog object provided. under the consumer widget in my homepage. This is a text widget displaying "I like dogs very much" in font size 20.0. From here, we don't want to rebuild the first text widget. This is the case where we use child argument, which is the third argument of the builder. Now, let's refactor this using child. Replace the first text widget with the child widget that was received as an argument. However, since child is nullable, we use the bang operator. And paste the text widget that we cut from the consumer's child property. Let's run it after doing a hard restart. It works normally. We now know the basic uses of consumer, but consumer has other important functions as well. Let's look at consumer's builder pattern next.